Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's good to be with you again. The last time I was here, I didn't think that I would have been back so early. I was planning to come up sometime in about July, but I am here, and it's really great to see all of you. I hope things are going well. The faces seem to indicate that things are going well. Some are more prosperous than others, some are more fruitful than others, and all of that. So I'm hearing some good news, which I would like to commend those persons and to wish them a safe delivery when the time comes. But it's really good to be with you, and it's really a pleasure to be able to share with you today. I really thank your leaders here for the opportunity to share yet again with you. I take this as a real great privilege of offering this opportunity, today. I learned that one of our elders will be here next week. I was saying to someone earlier that it seems as if I am always here a week earlier than when the leaders are coming. So it seems as if it happens again this time around. I think the last time I was here, the following week, I think Bill Watson, it was Elder Ramakan that would have been here at that time. So we are always missing, but it's good that I'm here to share with you today. One of the things to think about in this time is that we know the steep economic crisis that is on the world and the number of tragedies. We hear of what is happening in Japan, and of course many concern about nuclear power and so on. So there's a lot of concern to go around at this time. I was looking at one of your news station, I think CNN, that was pointing out that there are a number of nuclear plants here in Florida, and I think perhaps on the southern part of Florida. I'm not certain exactly where they are. But, it's a time in which persons are a bit apprehensive in terms of what might happen, particularly as related to energy. And you know that energy is an important commodity. But we have to keep praying, we have to keep doing our thing, and also ensure that whatever we do, that we are persons who are contributing to the good of the world and of our own society. As I sat there and listened to the sermonette, normally in Jamaica our sermonette is not as short as this. But as I sat and listened, I was saying to myself how the sermonette and the sermon follow a similar theme. And the theme has to do with the Passover. And this message that I would want to share with you today it focuses on a theme of the Passover. And I believe it's good that we have time to think about the themes of the various feasts. Not when the feasts are upon us, then we begin to think about them, but we have some time to reflect, to think about the varying themes that are in these festivals. And of course the Passover, which pictures the death of Christ and the redemption that is brought about, the reconciliation that is brought about by Christ's death. We think about those issues. We think about the sacrifice that he made, and as Alex pointed out, that he demonstrated by example what it is to love. Love costs. Love costs. There's a cost to love, and he showed that as well. And what I'll be presenting here today is a similar theme. A similar theme. I want to talk about forgiveness. I want to talk about forgiveness. In Romans 5 and verse 10, you don't have to turn there, but it talks about that we are reconciled to God by the death of Christ. We are reconciled to God by the death of Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:18 says that we are given this message of reconciliation. We are given the message of reconciliation. And in that same chapter, but verse 19, it says, God has committed to us the word of reconciliation. So we have gotten the ministry of reconciliation. In some translation, I believe it says we are given the message of reconciliation. We see this matter of reconciliation an important aspect, an important teachings of Scripture. But I want to talk about forgiveness, as I said. And the title of this message is Levels of Forgiveness. Levels of Forgiveness. How does forgiveness and reconciliation differ? Are they different? When a person talks about reconciliation and forgiveness, are they talking about exactly the same thing? We know that the two words are related, but how are they related? Are they related by virtue of being synonyms, word that means exactly the same thing? Forgiveness really is a step before we reach to reconciliation. Forgiveness comes before reconciliation. I'm hoping that in this message here today, I would like to touch on some of those points. But the main text that I would want to use as a means of putting together this message is found in Ephesians 4 and verse 31. If you would turn there with me to Ephesians 4 and verse 31. Ephesians 4 and verse 31. It reads, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." Now, the thing about forgiveness is that it sounds very simple. It sounds very easy. And some would say it's a relatively easy thing to forgive. Why preach about forgiveness? Why talk about forgiveness? I don't have a problem with forgiveness. And after all, it's a simple thing. I mean, who wouldn't want to forgive in certain cases? And so it might seem as if it's an easy topic, an easy thing to do. But others find it quite difficult. Quite difficult. You will hear of persons having malice for years, maybe even decades. And you would wonder, why? Why would a person hold malice for such an extended time? And so, when we come to this matter of forgiveness, it depends on where we are. It depends on where we are, actually. Because if we believe it's a simple issue, then it's a simple issue to us. But others find it quite difficult. Now, as I go through this presentation here, and as I prepare for this presentation here, I want to make a number of points at the outset. Is that there are real difficulties that persons have gone through in life. One of the things I was reading about is the case of this family in which the father was very abusive to the family. And indeed to the children as well, not just to the wife, but to the children. And so, growing up, the children were abused, and they really felt they didn't feel love from their father. And they took it for a while when they were smaller, but as they grew up into teenage years, they said, no, this ought not to be. My father is someone who's supposed to show me love. Why is he behaving this way towards me? And so the little girl began to talk back to the father. And of course, that angered the father even more. And so he became even more abusive. So the mother decided to leave the house with her children to take them out of that abusive relationship. But then that angered the father even more, because then he threatened to kill the daughter, because the daughter was the one who was always trying to talk back. And so he threatened to kill the daughter. But after a while, the father disappeared. No one knew where he was. I understand that one time he had threatened to kill himself. So they wondered whether or not he had committed suicide, because he didn't get back his family, because he wanted back his family to join the house. But the wife decided, we can't live under those circumstances. So this child grew up with abuse. She knew abuse. She was familiar with abuse. And the difficulties and the trauma that come from abuse. But then the father disappeared. And she now began to feel guilty that somehow her action led to her father's perhaps demise. So she was now feeling guilty over the possible death of her father. She might have contributed to it. All these feelings she had to deal with. So we are talking about real issues, real concern, real problems. But yet still Scripture tells us to forgive. Forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. I think one text says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. While we were yet enemies of God, Christ died for us. It's not that we were friends and you would want to go the extra mile for your friend, but when we were enemies of God, meaning that we were not living according to God's way, we told God, get out of our business, leave me alone, let me do my thing. While we took our own path, God sent his son to die for us, to reconcile us, to bring us back. So this matter of forgiveness, it touches very deep feelings. And we come to this issue not just mentally, but we come with our emotions when we come to this issue, because some of us might be able to relate to issues and circumstances and things that happened to us earlier. Are we to forgive the person who did us A, B, C? You know, there are two major reasons why persons find it hard to forgive. The first one is misconception about forgiveness. The first one is misconception about forgiveness. And the second one is that persons are sometimes just simply unwilling to forgive. Just simply unwilling to forgive. I'm hoping that as we go through this, all of us will reflect on it, because I believe that this matter of forgiveness is something that we all should think about. Because one of the points that I'm hoping to make is that maybe the reason why we're having forgiveness, we're not having a problem with forgiveness, is that something major has not happened to us as yet. Something major has not happened to us as yet. One of the questions I would like us to think about at the outset, and I will deal with it later on, is this such a thing as the unforgivable offense? The unforgivable offense. Is there such a thing in our minds that if someone were to commit an offense against us that we call the unforgivable, that we will not forgive them? We are taking that to our graves. If we have that view, then it is likely that sometime in the future we are going to be faced with perhaps that circumstances, that situation. How are we going to deal with it? If we have the view that there's something called the unforgivable offense, then it might happen to us. And at that time, it is not the best time to be thinking about forgiveness. Just as anything, when a person has done foolishly when it comes on to financial investment, a person invests in certain financial instruments and they took a beating from it. It is not the time to lecture the person in terms of good financial discipline. That's not the time. The person is not in the mood for that. Now, when we are going through difficult times that challenge our own emotions, it is not the best time to be talking about forgiveness, because our emotions begin to cloud out reasoning and scripture even. So it's good at the time we sit and we think about it as we go into the Passover, because the Passover is a time when we think about forgiveness. Forgiving others. Matthew talk about, even the Lord's Prayer talk about forgiving others to the extent that we forgive others is to the extent that we can ask for forgiveness. It's conditional upon our own forgiveness, it's conditional upon us forgiving others. So we think about it when we are at a stage in which we can really think about it with some degree of rationality. But forgiveness is not just forgiving others. Sometimes it is forgiving ourselves. Sometimes some people really blame themselves. Boy, I can't believe I was so stupid, and they can't forgive themselves because of something they have done. They can't forgive themselves. Judas, for example, in this story, he could not forgive himself because he betrayed Christ. He could not forgive himself. Peter was crushed because he rejected Christ. But yet still we saw Peter come back after such a crushing emotional blow. I want to start by looking at what forgiveness is not. I want to look at it in two ways: what forgiveness is not and what forgiveness is. Perhaps when we look at it at two sides, we'll be able to see, because as I said, sometimes it is misconception that lead many not to forgive. No, forgiveness is not denying the offense. Some people believe that if you say you forgive, it is denying that the thing happened, that somebody did wrong. Forgiveness is not denying some painful experience. Yes, there is a truth of that painful experience that we all suffer sometimes. But there are also other truths. Truths like we can forgive. Not that we overlook the offense. I say, oh, it's nothing. We recognize that it's an offense, but at the same time, we are willing to go beyond that offense and forgive. The second thing is, forgiveness is not a once-for-all-time event. It's not a once-for-all-time event, meaning that I forgive this person now, and I don't have to do anything else again. Once I forgive, it's finished. I don't have to do anything else in the future. But one of the things that we should note is forgiveness is not just a one-act thing. Because when memory of the incident, of the trauma return to us, we are going to have to deal with that situation. Because memories, we are going to recall. We hear the talk about post-traumatic event. When we think about it, maybe we see the person and the whole thing just flash back in our memories. We are going to have to will at that instant to forgive. Not just at the instant, the first instant in which we say we forgive. If I should give an example, let's say someone owe you, let's say $1,000. And the person, they can't pay it back, and boy, they're just unwilling to pay it back, but you notice that they really don't have the money. You might decide to say, okay, I will forgive that person of the money, I let it go. After all, the person can't pay it back. I decide to, let's forgive the person. Let's forgive them. But down the road, you notice that the person coming to some money. You don't think that you're going to remember that $1,000 that the person owe you. And you might even say, no. You owe me some money, you ought to pay. So not because you might have forgiven the person of that money in the first instant mean that later on when the person can now pay, that you are not going to demand payment. So each time we are revisited, or each time the situation revisits us, or we bring it to our consciousness, we are going to have to exercise will in that moment to still forgive and not be resentful to the person. The third thing I'd like to point out is forgiveness is not passively tolerating future injury. Some people believe that once you forgive, it means that you're setting up yourself for future hurt. And that is one of the biggest reasons why people don't forgive, because they say, if I forgive, the person is going to do it again. And therefore, in order to prevent future hurt, I am not going to forgive. I'm not going to forgive the offender. But there are other ways of safeguarding ourselves from being offended. And hopefully I'll get to some of those later on. Now, the fourth thing I'd like to point out is that forgiveness is not only for selfish reasons. Sometimes you might see people talk about, or read a person talking about, forgiveness is for your own good. Meaning that when you forgive, you're able to live better, live more peaceful, and so on. Yes, forgiveness is that. But biblical forgiveness is not just aimed at the person who was hurt, but is also aimed at restoring the person who created the offense in the first place. So it is not just selfish, meaning that I will forgive because when I harbor bitterness, I am going to be hurt. It's not just that, but also we need to look at the offending party, the person who created the offense, because the Bible looks at that person as well. The fifth thing is that forgiveness is not simply letting the offender off the hook. Some persons believe that to forgive means I'm going to let the person off the hook. The person is not going to pay, and the scores must be settled. So if I forgive the person, then I'm letting the person off the hook. No, that's not what forgiveness is. Because there are other courts that deals with the matter of consequence. Because action, there are consequences to actions. And some of those consequences are determined in civil court, as in our earthly human court, but some of those offenses are dealt with in the court of God. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. It is not upon us to take out vengeance upon someone else, but to leave it to the court of God to determine in terms of consequence. The sixth thing that I would want to talk about, what forgiveness is not, is forgiveness is not reconciliation. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. Forgiveness is really the act of one person deciding to take that decision not to feel resentful towards the other party who offended them. So it is an act, one person taking that act. I am going to forgive this person has done me something wrong, I am going to forgive that person. So it's a one-party act, forgiveness. But reconciliation is a bilateral agreement to come back together to mend the relationships. Many times you'll find, for example, in marriage, you might find forgiveness. You might forgive the spouse, you might forgive a spouse. But it might not be wise to reconcile under certain circumstances. So it depends on whether or not it is appropriate to come back together, because in some cases of, for example, battering and so on, in which persons are physically abusive, you might forgive the person who is physically abusive, but it might not be a wise idea to reconcile with that person at some stage of the game. You will have to look and see whether or not you're going to go back together with that person, or that person needs to take some action to control anger, etc. But reconciliation and forgiveness are not one and the same. Forgiveness is one party taking a unilateral act, not to feel resentful. Reconciliation is a bilateral, two parties coming together and agreeing that the relationship is going to be renewed. As I say, it's not always appropriate to renew relationship, even though you might have extended forgiveness to the person, but not the renewal of the relationship. But what forgiveness is? What is forgiveness? What is this thing we call forgiveness? You know, in a simple way, forgiveness is really accepting the injury of past offenses and really trusting God that God will work with us for their good. You remember the story of Joseph? You remember the Joseph story? Joseph's story. His brother sold him out into slavery. But afterwards, we heard Joseph's own remarks as a person who had forgiven his brother. You intended it for evil, but God intended it for good. That's forgiveness. He forgave his brother. And incidentally, he reconciled with his brother. They restored the relationship, as we learn from that scripture. Understanding the work of God in forgiveness and in reconciliation, because these are work, these are joint work. A work on our part, but a work that God also accomplished in us through His Holy Spirit. I came across a definition for forgiveness, which I have sort of embraced, because I think it sort of captures a number of the important elements. This can be improved, I am almost sure. But I think it captures the essential elements of forgiveness. It says, forgiveness is the moment-to-moment experience of peace and understanding that occurs when an injured party's suffering is reduced as they transform their grievance against an offending party. It's a moment-to-moment experience of peace and understanding that occurs when an injured party's suffering is reduced as they transform their grievance against an offending party. Moment-to-moment peace. You remember I said earlier that we always have to will to forgive? No, it might mean, and I gave an example in which the person owed $1,000. So when the person could not pay back that $1,000, you decided to forgive, and you begin to sense a peace. But afterwards, the person is able now to pay back that money, and now the peace is gone from you, because you are now saying that yes, the person ought to owe me, ought to pay me back because the person owed me. So I believe this captures the central element that we always have to will to forgive, because sometimes we are going to be reminded of the incident. And when we are reminded, it's going to put us in a state in which we will have to take a decision as to what we're going to do. It's a moment-to-moment experience of peace and understanding. Sylvia Plath is reported to have said, "You don't forgive people because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to understand that people make mistakes." Forgiveness is not something for the weak. The weak are not able to forgive that easily. It is the strong that forgive. Think about Jesus Christ. Think about God. Why is it that He's able to forgive? Because of His tremendous strength. Not because of His weakness, but because of His strength. Forgiveness is something that the strong will do. So if we're having a problem with forgiveness, it means that we have a way to go in terms of our own spiritual strength. But I want to look at a little bit more at forgiveness. No, the alternative to forgiveness is actually unforgiveness, which leads to bitterness. Once a person refuses to forgive, it's going to lead into bitterness. You're going to feel bitter towards a person. And you're going to feel a sense that you want to pay back the person for what they have done. You want to get back the person. You want the person to feel the hurt that you're feeling. And it's going to set up this bitterness that is within. But sometimes we might not believe that we are still angry at someone, that we are in a state of forgiveness. So I want us to look at some of the symptoms of bitterness. Because remember I said that unforgiveness is going to lead to bitterness. What are some of the symptoms of bitterness? One of the symptoms is justifying retributive anger, meaning that, boy, I have to pay him back, man. I can't let it go like that. Look at what the person did, and we begin to exaggerate the offense. So that is one way to get sympathy from a person. And a person will say to you, say, no man, you can't make the person get away with that. The person has to be brought to account. So that is one symptom of bitterness. The next one is, as I said, justifying you're really expressing your retributive anger. One, you're justifying it, saying that, boy, I have all right to feel this way, and look at the big thing that the person has done me. So we make what is called a mountain out of a molehill. I don't know if you're familiar with that term here. It's a Jamaican expression. Are you familiar with the term? Making a mountain out of a molehill. So we begin to expand the offense, make the offense seem a bit larger than it really is. Justifying our anger. To say, yes, I have grown to be angry because this thing is so enormous that the person has done. And the second one is expressing anger, meaning that we begin to withdraw from the relationship. If it's a relationship, we begin to withdraw. In Jamaican term, we use the slang, you take away yourself. You take away yourself from the relationship. That's what it really means. But in Jamaican term, we say, you take away yourself. So you can remove yourself from the congregation. For example, if it's a congregation like this, a person say, I don't want to fellowship with anybody in this congregation. I am going to remove myself to another congregation. I'm going to take myself away from this relationship and I'm going to pursue other relationships. Silent treatment, these are some of the things that you'll find as an expression of bitterness. Maybe you're walking down the street and you see the person, you go on the other side so as not to say good morning to the person or even come close to the person. So you walk on the other side of the road rather than continue down that road. And it's not that you have something to do on the other side of the road, but you're deliberately trying to avoid the person. And any such thing in which you would have done something, but for the person you divert, it means that you have been conquered by bitterness. Bitterness is still an issue. So this matter of bitterness, it really can, and you see, because it's an emotional reality, it's difficult because we're talking about emotions. And we know that emotions is one of the last hurdles to conquer. Emotional development is one of the last hurdles that man master. You find a person who has done tremendously well intellectually, several PhD perhaps, but just can't deal with relationships, can't deal with anger. They get angry for the slightest thing, but they have several PhDs. They can rocket scientists, for want of a better term. But at the same time, they are novices when it comes on to anger management. Now, there are two types of bitterness. One is direct bitterness, in which you feel bitter, you feel angry at someone. But there's another bitterness, and that is called floating bitterness, in which anybody that resembles the person that you are bitter towards, you are going to feel bitter towards them. So this has implication for relationships, because let's say a person had bitterness against his father or his mother, and they find someone that resembles their father or their mother, they're going to feel bitter. They're going to transfer that bitterness towards them because the person look like your mother, look like your father. And it happens a lot in relationships, in which the wife reminds the husband of, his mother and so on, or vice versa. So it happens in relationship. Pastors too. Pastors are also objects of anger. Maybe the pastor says something and a person took offense of it, didn't go back and say, I heard you say something, I'd like to say to you that I felt hurt by it, and so on. But no, they feel angry and bitter at the pastor, and after a while, they find themselves out of the congregation because they have not taken the steps to deal with the anger, to deal with the bitterness. So we find this situation here of bitterness and anger, which the Bible really warns us against. Because the Bible upholds us to be forgiving. Forgiving. As I said, there are several reasons why persons don't forgive. And some persons don't forgive simply because they don't value the relationship. If a person says, the relationship is nothing, I am not going to be even bothered to forgive because the relationship means nothing to me. So some persons reach a stage in which they don't value relationships. It means that they don't value persons. The image of God that is in each person is not valued. The person is nobody. I don't forgive a person because he's nobody. So you don't value the person. You don't value the relationship. As I say, fear of being put in the vulnerable position again. That is one of the greatest fear. I won't let this thing happen to me again, so therefore I find myself better behind unforgiveness. But another reason why some persons don't forgive so easily? Pride. Pride or ego. We want to feel in control and supreme, and the others are attacking our image of selves as being all that, as I think the American term. So when a person does something, it's like we feel as if we are some elevated deity, that they have offended us, and so on. That is sense in which some persons refuse to forgive because their ego are too big to be able to forgive. They feel extremely hurt. Some persons are just reluctant to let go of anger because they feel that the anger is well placed. Anger is well placed. And there can be a sense of justice or justified anger, as some people would call it. You've heard the term about righteous indignation? You've heard the term righteous indignation? In which a person feels righteous in pursuing justice, because normally, as I said, forgiveness presupposes that some offense was made. But there is this thirst for justice, that the person will hide behind the cloak of justice. Justice must be done. And so there is this thirst for justice. This thirst that the person must pay back. And is often in conflict with any desire to forgive. So we have two conflicting values. One value is justice must be done. The other value is it is good to forgive. And we have these two in conflict. And some persons are going to elevate justice. Justice must be done. Justice means that this person must pay for it. I believe in the words of one of your president, Theodore Roosevelt. He says, if I must choose between righteousness and peace, I choose righteousness. You sense that you're right and that you have God on your side in executing justice. That's one of the reasons why persons sometimes don't think about forgiveness. Because they need to quench their thirst for justice. And justice is a powerful drive. Or injustice, powerful drive. When you feel sense of justice or injustice, punishment must be meted out. Another reason why some persons don't forgive is that they believe that some persons, there's no good in them. There's no good. They are not redeemable. It doesn't worth the time to forgive because the person has no capacity to do good. There is a popular phrase that women use, I believe. Particularly when they are in relationship and the relationship get bad. They might say, all men are dogs. Or you might have heard it, all men are dogs. All men are dogs. So the one offense that this person has done, he is going to pay for the offense of all men all over the world. Because all men are dogs. And this particular one is going to pay for all the offense. So women say that. And men will say, all women are Delilahs. All women are Delilahs. So these are the story. And there's a song, I think some of the older ones might know it. Why Delilah? I think Tom Jones or one of those guys did it sometime in the past. The older ones might know something like that. But we have these images of persons that they are not redeemable. There's nothing good can come out of these persons. It's the same thing they said of Jesus Christ. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Can't. Nothing good can come out of it. So therefore, we don't feel that need to forgive. But you know, brethren, where we stand on this issue of forgiveness is dependent on the stage that we're at. I want to suggest that forgiveness can be looked at in terms of 4 stages. And these stages can be looked at as stages of maturity. Stages of maturity. So there are 4 stages. We might even use certain imagery to characterize this stage. There's the infant stage. The infant or baby stage. You remember, I think, in Corinthians where Paul says, I would want to write to you, but you are still babes in Christ. Because know that there's strife and envy and so on between you. You are still babes. So that's the baby stage. Then the second stage, if you want to use another metaphor, is the adolescent stage, in which you're growing up, but you're not quite there as yet. And then the third stage is the more mature / maturing stage. You're mature, but at the same time, you're still maturing. That's the third stage. And the fourth stage is the mature / perfect stage. I want to suggest that Christ is at level 4. You know, some time ago, I remember this person had a tremendous problem with forgiveness. And you know, person will go and talk to them and say, you know, you really need to let go of this bitterness. It's really hurting you. It don't argue well for a person who calls himself a child of God. And she said, I am not Jesus. So I can have this fault of unforgiveness. I am not Jesus. Jesus forgave. But she's right, she's not Jesus. Neither is any one of us. But Jesus is at stage 4. I want to suggest that in this particular instance, she's at stage 1. And I'll explain stage 1 in a little while. She's at stage 1. But there is no desire to move from stage 1 to stage 4. It's embracing bitterness. Holding on to bitterness because all she can see is the hurt that the person has done. And no, I can't let it go. You remember earlier I said, if there's something that in your mind is the unforgivable offense. I was talking to someone and they had a whole list of unforgivable offense. And I think some of us, we might have that. We might not have thought about it in that way, but it's something for us to think about. Because if that offense were to happen to us, we are going to be in difficulty in trying to escape bitterness, trying to escape unforgiveness. Think about it. Is there something that someone can do to you that you will be so offended, you will be so hurt that it would not be right in your mind to forgive? You just can't forgive for that. Think about it. I think about this. Because as I am saying that the reason why we might be comfortable now is because we have not reached our Waterloo yet. That's why we can think that we have arrived in terms of forgiveness. I am a forgiving person. I am a forgiving person. I don't have a problem with forgiveness. But maybe the offense has not come yet that we call the unforgivable offense. So this message is to prepare all of us. If or when that time should come, how will we deal with it? Because to pre-warn is to pre-arm. We have to arm ourselves for that eventuality later on. We have to prepare ourselves for that, because chances are it might come. If we have this view that there are some things that are unforgivable. You know, the Bible talks a lot about forgiveness, and I think we know the text. There are several texts. I read one in Ephesians 4:31. It says, "Get rid of all bitterness," and so on. Hebrews talk about, "See that no one misses the grace of God, and that no root of bitterness cause us trouble and defile us." Because bitterness really defiles. It defiles us physically, it defiles us spiritually. This is something that affects both the physical, the biological, the mental, the psychological, and the spiritual. This one incident, this thing that we're talking about here, is not just in terms of the physical and so on. It also impacts the spiritual. We know that in Matthew 6, as I mentioned earlier, forgiveness, or forgiving others, is tied to God forgiving us. Forgive us of our sins as we have forgiven others. To the extent that we have forgiven others is to the extent that we are asking for forgiveness. To that extent. I want to look at the levels of forgiveness. But before I do that, I want us to think about something. You remember the disciples came to Jesus and say, how many times should I forgive in one day? A person sinned 7 times 7, Master. And they think that they were doing great. They say 7 times, for a person to offend you 7 times in one day and you forgive. It's really a lot, It's really a lot. But Jesus said, no, 70 times 7. And then, when we read 1 Corinthians 13, we find in 1 Corinthians 13 that talks about love. Love keeps no record of wrongs. No, that is at all one. Because it seemed to me now that the number of times we should forgive is limitless. Because you shouldn't be counting to 70 times 7, that's how much? 70 times 7 is what, 490? So we shouldn't be counting up to 490 and say, oh yes, the person is at 490 or 489 now. So therefore they just have 1 to go. 1 Corinthians 13, it says, you shouldn't be keeping a record in the first place because love keeps no record of wrongs. So we begin to see the limit. We should be prepared to give forgiveness. What about, I've heard somebody say that in order for me to forgive, the person would have to come and ask for forgiveness. Sometimes you might do somebody something and the person just stand there. It's like they're saying to me, you're not going to say sorry. You're not going to say sorry. They're standing there demanding that you say I'm sorry or something. From the look in their face and how they posture themselves, you can see that they are demanding some apology. Does a person have to ask for forgiveness for you to forgive? No. The person doesn't have to ask. Remember I said, it's a unilateral decision. Jesus said, if you're at the come to offer your gift, and you remember that somebody has something against you, don't even bother offer your gift. Let that stay. As much as it's important to offer gifts to God, let that stay. You go and deal with the offense with your brother. And when you have done that, you come and you offer your gift. That's how important it is. Jesus, when he was being crucified, those who crucified him, did they ask for forgiveness? Anyone in them ask for forgiveness? They say, let his blood fall on our shoulder and our children's shoulder. Let us pay for it. We are willing to pay for it. Jesus said, forgive them, Lord. Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they have done. Sometimes persons act really out of ignorance. They don't know any better. The story I relate to you about this father who acted in a bad way towards his family. He came from a broken family, and that was his experience. He came from a family that didn't show him love. His father didn't show him any love. And so he was acting on what he learned. Some persons just don't know better. They're conditioned in that sort of way. And until they can get some teaching or they can come to some understanding, some persons just don't know better. And you might think that they know better, but they just don't know better. They just don't know better. But there are 4 stages of forgiveness. 4 stages. But you know, brethren, this whole matter of forgiveness, I want to say something to us about forgiveness. Forgiveness stems from the fact that we have a choice. It's always a choice. We have the choice. We can make that decision to forgive, and we can make that decision not to forgive. So it boils down to a choice. Our unwillingness or our willingness to forgive is always an indication of the level of control we have over ourselves, over our emotions, over our will. Because if we're saying that we are not going to forgive, it means that perhaps we don't have any much control over our emotions or our will. I want us to look at stage 1. Stage 1. Remember, we're saying that there are levels of forgiveness or stages of forgiveness. Stage 1. Stage 1 is when you're filled with anger that you feel is justified, self-justified anger. You feel angry over something and you believe that you're right to feel angry about it. Maybe you're coming through the door and someone was before you, and that person, rather than holding the door for you to come in, just close the door in your face. And you feel as if the person slighted you. So you feel angry at the person. You have a right to be angry at the person because the person insulted your person. The person didn't recognize you, and so on. So you feel angry. You feel wounded, and you are even mad or hurt by somebody who you feel has wronged you. So somebody has wronged you, and you are feeling hurt. So somebody wronged you, and you're feeling hurt. That's stage 1. But also, you believe that the person's action rather, and not your choice, is the reason why you are feeling distress. So in other words, when you feel angry because the person closed the door in your face, you are saying to yourself that it is not my choice in terms of how I look at that situation that determine my distress, but it is a person's action. It's more or less something like, the devil make me do it. Or look at what you make me do. I am feeling angry, and it is because of you that I am angry. I didn't have a control, I didn't have a choice whether or not I will be angry in the first place. You caused me to be angry. I didn't have a choice, it's automatic. That is stage one. And another aspect of the stage one is that you feel convinced that you have the right to withhold forgiveness from the person. You have the right because the person has really offended you. So I have a right to my anger. Let me hold on to my anger, as the person would have said in that when you're trying to ask them not to feel so bitter. They want to hold on to bitterness. So that is stage one. Stage one really is the stage of unforgiveness in which you can't forgive. Because the distress that you are feeling is the distress not caused by your choice to be angry in the first place, but by the person's action. So you are blaming others for your hurt. That's stage one. But let's look at stage two. Stage two. Stage two now is when you come to the realization that feeling angry and bitter really hurt. And it is not having a good effect on your physical and emotional life. You come to that, you see that. You see that in your, I don't like how I feel because I'm feeling bad, I'm feeling bitter. It's really inhibiting my movements and so on, inhibiting my own development. So you wish to repair the relationship. You wish to reach out to the person and to forgive the person. But then you start to forgive the person and you notice how you feel a little bit better. You begin to see the benefit now of forgiveness. You begin now to put yourselves in the person's shoes and say, you know, boy, sometimes I do some wrong things sometimes. You know, so the person did something wrong and I can understand. It's not that I excuse it, but I can understand. We make mistakes. So at that time now, you begin to feel less angry at the person. That's stage two. Stage three now is that you begin to see the effects of forgiveness more and more. And you choose to let go of the hurt and the anger much easier. So it takes a shorter time now for you to forgive. Let's say at stage two, stage one is never forgiving. Stage two is, let's say it takes you a week to forgive. Stage three now is when you take, let's say, a day. So that is basically stage three. You're maturing in terms of the time you're taking to forgive. Because you're seeing the benefit of it. And you're deciding for yourself that it's not good at all for you to be in this stage. So forgiveness now becomes easier. You begin to develop this practice of forgiveness. Stage four is the proactive stage. Stage four is a practice stage now where you really take offense in the first place. You really, if ever, take offense. And if you are offended, you would move quickly to forgive. You perhaps even forgive the person before they even ask. You remember Jesus? That's a proactive stage. The person didn't ask. He just said, I forgive. Father, forgive them. But, you know, I want to make the point that while we're talking about these stages, I want us to see these stages as, for each incident, for each offense, we are presented with these stages. So each offense, it's not that we are at stage 3 or stage 4 for all offense. At times, we might be at stage 1, at times we might be at stage 2, stage 3, and even stage 4. I suspect that if we were to be traveling on a bus and someone accidentally, you know, step on our toes and say, excuse, I'm sorry, we are not going to feel so bad, you know, about the person. We might say, no, it's all right, you know, don't worry about it. We are not going to be so angry. So we readily forgive the person. Or the person bunks us or something like that. Or some accident, you know, we are going to be easy to forgive and say, no, it's not a big thing. It's okay. And we will not remember about those incidents years after, or months after, or weeks after. We're going to forget about it. Because it is in our mind a simple offense. And we are at stage 4. So as the person, touch off our foot, we are going to forgive right there and then. We are not going to be having this resentment and this anger and so on. We are going to forgive on the spot. But that is for a small offense. But when you come on to major offense now, that one takes time. That one is the one that takes time. So stage 4 now is the stage in which we decide really to feel offended in the first place. And we are prepared to forgive without us going through the hurt and the suffering and so on. We readily forgive, as it were. That is the stage. Jesus is at the stage for all offense. Even betrayal. And you know, betrayal is one of the most hurtful things that you can think about. A person who you have trusted, a person who you develop this relationship with, and the person has offended you, the person has betrayed you, is really a hurtful feeling. Jesus forgave. Didn't take him time. Right, readily, he forgave. Suppose we were to be betrayed. Do you think that we would be at stage 4? That we would forgive right readily? Even the person who were to crucify Christ, he forgave them on the spot. He didn't even begin to think about the injustice of his crucifixion and to say, look at what you're going to do to me. Look at the evil that you're going to visit upon me. Justice demands that you be held accountable. Because he said I could call 10,000 angels and escape this. But he went through the injustice. As Alex said, he was very God. Can you imagine somebody so majestic and you have these infidels, as it were, persecuting him, and he just look and say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Can you imagine that level of maturity, that level of perfection? I say sometimes we display it for small things. But what about that unforgivable offense? Maybe betrayal, maybe some other thing. I don't know what that might be. Let's think about it. Those levels of forgiveness. But you know, in order for us to reach stage 4, we will have to have certain thought process. We will have to have certain things in our mind before we can say we are at that stage, stage 4. We will have to have certain thought process. One of the things that we have to think about and come to embrace fully is that it is a waste of time to be angry at others. It's a waste of time. Why lose sleep over an incident or several nights of sleep? Can't sleep because I'm angry, I can't sleep. I want to visit justice upon this person. You can't sleep. The person who offended you, sleeping nicely in the bed. They're not even thinking about you. And you are there angry, can't sleep. We have to come to that realization that that person is perhaps not even thinking about you. And you're there angry and can't sleep. A person who's at stage 4 come to the realization that there are too many beauties in this world to be angry. Look at so many nice things to do, rather than being sitting at home and angry and bitter. Nice people to meet, like yourselves, rather than staying at home. Some person withdraw themselves from the congregation and say, boy, I'm going to stay home because I can't go there. I can't go there and see John Brown or Tom Stroke or Mrs. Jane or whatever name it is. So they withdraw themselves. And what about some of your beautiful people that I come here and meet when I visit? And those smiling faces, and those faces of cheers and so on. They withdraw themselves from the congregation, withdraw themselves from fellowship. When there's so many beautiful people that they could have met, that they could have fellowship with or continue the fellowship with. At stage 4, you come to the realization that everybody acts out of self-interest. And that what happens many times is just that self-interest collide. You know, I do a lot of driving, and sometimes a person cut me off, and, you know, sometimes I say, you know, look at that. I would call them Edie Beerhead, because I don't see them have on any hat. So I wouldn't say Edie hat. I would say Edie Beerhead. But that person will just come and cut you off, and in that instant you feel a bit, you know, that the person cut you off, and what kind of mad driving is this? And so on. You might at that instant feel, you know, a bit offended that the person didn't show that they recognize that you're there and you want to reach where you're going. They cut over in the line, and they cut over in that way as if they demand that, you just take it as is. That's what they demand. You just take it as that and don't say anything. Waste of time being angry at the person. You know what the person is? The person perhaps is just trying to get where they're going faster than you want to get where you're going. Suppose you believe that that person is not really aiming at assaulting your ego. That person is just merely wanting to reach early, and they're late for some appointment and they have to reach, or else they're going to lose their job, and they think about the family at home that is going to be out of money because they lose their job. They are acting out of their own self-interest. So if you come to that realization, then you will realize that it is not so personal all the while. Don't take it personal. The person coming through the door and they didn't open the door for you, hold the door for you. The person probably had some problems and they were thinking about somebody else coming there, thinking about the problem that is on their mind. They're going to lose their job, they're going to lose their house, and so on. And they just leave the door. They were not thinking about you coming. So it's not that they were trying to assault your ego or so on. They were just burdened with their own problems. Suppose we see it in that sort of way. No, by holding on to grievance, we are actually letting the person have control over our lives. If a person can get you angry, it's like a puppet on a string, and a person can say, look, I'm going to get him, do this now. And the person just do something for you to get angry, and you just kick down the door and kick down the cat and all of these things. The person just pull your string, as we call it. I think you've heard the term. A person pull your string, and you're like a puppet and you just react. Because your action is predictable. A person come home and the boss said a bad thing, and they come home and the cat come out and the dog come out and just kick the dog and something like that. You know, control the string. Persons have control over you. Many times, persons will do things because they want to exercise control. They just like to feel in control, so they will do a number of things, and it's to your hurt, maybe. But it's just because of their interest in maintaining control. You have to understand that that's what they want. It's not so much about you, but it's just that they want to feel in a sense of control. You come to the realization at this stage that making peace with the past can really free you up in the present. You're really free. Because to the extent that you have left those things and you're not burdened by anger and guilt and all of these things, it's to that extent that you can be free in the present. That is the thinking that underlines stage 4. And the last one I would like to mention is coming to the realization that you're feeling anger right now. It is not about an incident that happened, let's say, a week ago. It's not that incident that happened a week ago that caused you to feel angry now. It is your refreshing of that incident in the now that is causing you to still be angry. when that incident happened a week ago, you feel angry there and then. But suppose you didn't remember about it and you didn't rehash it. You wouldn't feel bitter, you wouldn't feel angry now. So if we can change our thought process so that we let go of those hurts and realize that those happened in the past, and that is our thought process in the now that is causing us the distress. So if we can change our thought process, we can be less bitter. We can be less angry. And we must realize also that we have a choice whether or not an incident is going to cause us to be angry or resentful in the first place. So that I think that is the stage that we all need to think about reaching. That we believe in our own minds that we have a choice as to whether we get angry in the first place. Because people can do things that we don't feel angry about them. We can choose not to be angry. We can choose. We have that choice. Remember I said it's about choice. We can choose not to be angry at things. So the person coming through the door and they close the door in your face, you can choose not to be angry. It's always a choice. I was coming here on Friday, and the plane came in a little bit early. And so I think there were about 2 immigration officers. And I believe, or 3, I think it could have been 3. 2 were serving citizens. 1 was serving visitors. The visitor line was far longer, at least 3 times as long as the citizen line. But this person that was serving the visitor, the person wasn't working on a consistent basis. And the citizens got through much faster than the visitors. It's only after the citizens got through, then the visitors begin to be served so that they can go and collect their luggage and on their way. No, you can say, well, boy, what kind of injustice is this? You know, I'm beginning to feel angry at the officer. Didn't you know that I was waiting in line? Look how many people are here. Why didn't you serve me and so on? And you were serving all those people and it's just a few of them and you have all the officers over there and we have to wait until when you're finished before you can serve us. You can take that way. Or you can just say, this is how it works. Just a matter of self-interest. We have a term in Jamaica. Passing Christian in Pickney first. I don't know if you understand that, what that means. That there's a thing called christening, and not certain if you understand that, that thing in which you bring up the baby to bless, the blessing of the babes. So what they're saying is that the elder, the pastor, will bless his baby first because he doesn't want the blessing to run out, or maybe he don't get an opportunity to bless his baby. So he makes sure that his baby get the first blessing, and whatever is left for the others. It's that same thing. People operate from that. I shouldn't take it personal that they were aiming at me and saying, boy, you know, they take care of their citizens first. That's how it goes. I wouldn't feel offended by it. But if we can decide in the first place whether or not we allow any incident, any situation to let us feel angry or hurt, we have that control. We should not give it up easily. We should strive, brethren, not to let it hurt us. We have a choice as to whether or not any incident will hurt us in the first place. We can do that. And if it does hurt us, then we also have a choice as to how quickly we can resolve and deal with those. So I'd like to exhort us, brethren, in the words of Ephesians, as I close, that we should not let anger and bitterness be part of our own experience. And we develop this prolonged anger and bitterness, that we have a choice as to whether or not we will become angry, even in the first place. Much more to reach the stage where we are going to be acting in a forgiving way. We have a choice. So if we are unable to ward off this anger and bitterness, I would like to exhort us, brethren, as the words of Paul in Ephesians 4:31 says, get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you.